Amy and Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on the live stream. It's great to have you. Amy, I'm going to start with you. Could you talk about your practice at Ansira and how, something I know you work on quite a lot in your practice, working with clients, the concept of empathy. Could you talk a little bit about how that comes into play, and then how that kind of feeds into the discussion we want to have here, which is around how you intersect that in driving a customer experience leveraging AI?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to start with a quote for you. So this is a quote from Brene Brown. She's a renowned speaker and author. And she says that empathy is a choice and it's a vulnerable one. And the reason I like that is there's like two key things to unpack. One is, as marketers, it really is to be empathetic in marketing. We have to make that choice. It's a conscious decision we have to make. It's something we have to practice making. It's something we have to plan for in our marketing. And I know it doesn't happen overnight. And so at Ansira, we really provide a research-driven approach to strategic communications, so that we can think of that consumer first, try to walk in her footsteps or his footsteps, and really start to plan so that when we use tools like artificial intelligence and customer data platforms, the end result ultimately is more.
Wonderful. As you think about empathy in sort of the intersection with leveraging AI, what's the kind of examples? What are some places to start as you kind of explore that idea?
It's really all centered around the data.
Right, and that is the thing, right? It's like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So it's all about the health and wealth of the data that you have available to you. With artificial intelligence, you have to train it, and it must have a way to be able to learn about the emotions that we as humans experience. And the only way that you can do that is with the data that you're able to collect. And that for a long time, there's been conversations around first-party data collection, and that really gives you great insight into like a user's or a customer's behaviors, their preferences. But zero-party data collection is something that's incredibly important when you're trying to interject empathy into your marketing communications. So again, the health and the wealth of the data that you're collecting, you have to let the empathy drive the data strategy for what you're going to capture, and know how you intend to use that from a messaging perspective to engage your consumers.
I love that. When I'm thinking about empathy, like this construct, it really is. What we've been trying to do in digital commerce and digital marketing now for some time is driving a relevant, personalized experience. And in order to do that, you have to A, be listening, B, be diligent about your data and your data cleanliness, and kind of manage that effectively and maintain that effectively. But then you got to deploy it in such a way that is in the service, in my opinion, of the customer. So I love this idea of sort of using the concept of empathy as we think about digital marketing and how to do that. Amy, what's an example of like a common use case that we might find in digital commerce and digital marketing where you think leveraging that kind of construct is helpful?
So it's really interesting because we know that consumers expect us to know them, right? At this point in our marketing evolution, they're providing data and they're expecting us to use it in the right way. But they have some pretty strong points of view on what empathy looks like for them when they're being marketed to. So there's a McKinsey study out on the power of personalization. And some of the things that really pop to the top when consumers are telling us what they want is, for instance, celebrating my milestones, or obviously personally addressing me in communications, or tailoring messages to my needs, right? Not just to who I am, but to my needs in the moment, or sending me timely communications that are tied to key moments for me, right? So you start to see where that personalization and that one-on-one is so important, but you really have to plan ahead of time to understand and recognize what those pathways might be, right?
Absolutely. And then, one example that sort of jumps to mind that is such a common use case in e-commerce is, an abandoned cart scenario where there's, obviously communications going back out to the customer. Oftentimes that can come across as kind of knocking someone over the head. It can come across as kind of cynical, sometimes noisy and kind of interruptive.
Mhm.
A lot of customers have used that as a negative example. But what's a way to kind of turn that around and using sort of this concepts that we've been discussing here to reinvent how you might think about leveraging personalization tools, customer data platforms, marketing channels, to do that in a way that's constructive and helps support the customer journey?
So abandoned cart is a really good one. And actually, that's the one that we're going to discuss with the guests that are coming to Napa. We're actually asking them to come up with their own abandoned cart experience using empathy as a planning method, but then using artificial intelligence capabilities to really make that come to life. So one thing we're going to ask them to do, though, is to think about it more holistically. The scenario, the experience shouldn't start at the time of cart abandon. You have to think about maybe what is happening in that consumer's mindset ahead of that action, right? That's where the planning comes into play. So I'm going to give you an example. Say this is a pet care store, and you have a consumer. She's been a customer of yours for 10 years. And we know that she has a large dog, age 10. And her last purchase of large dog food was about 2 months ago. And then about a month ago, we started seeing that she was looking at different things on the website. She was looking at small dog food, small breed food on the website. So that we can say, okay, that's something different. So perhaps we can use technology and artificial intelligence to predict that something has changed in her interactions with us, her history with us. So we need to dig in a little bit more. And this is where the empathy comes into play, because we don't necessarily know what's happening and we shouldn't assume what's happening. So people like to give their opinion. So why don't we ask them? It's the power of zero data collection. And we can do that with web layers, popping those personalized experiences and asking the question of, we noticed something different here. Can you tell us more? So we don't assume, and we learn that possibly her larger dog may be passed in this instance. So right there's a chance to be empathetic, and you can tailor messaging in a respectful way. You can use AI content generation to do that now that you know her mindset, her mood state at the time. Okay, so now we know that, and that's all before that abandoned cart happens. She put a small dog kennel in her cart, and then she did buy. Normally, we would say, oh, small dog cart, great. She didn't purchase it. Let's send that email out right away and ask her to buy that crate or that kennel, right? And that's where we're like, okay, let's take a pause. Let's understand her mindset right now. We have to do something different for her. And it's her in this particular instance, but I'm sure this happens to others. There's going to be a segment of the population that possibly has a dog that passes away, right? So if you're a pet care store and you do your research and you understand that this might be a need state, you can plan accordingly. So now, instead of sending that email, that abandoned cart email right away, maybe we use optimal send time AI to wait a little bit longer for this particular consumer, this particular segment, right? And then personalize her headlines because we know what she has experienced over the last few months. And that way, we're going to hopefully get her to understand that we care for her and then ultimately make that purchase.
I love that example. Mike, turning to you, how would you look at that from a data platform perspective? What's needed in order to, support a scenario like that?
Yeah. So, kind of echoing what Amy was talking about, you're integrating this human connection with artificial intelligence. And trying to your question, from a data perspective, what are we looking at? Well, at Ansira, we have this concept of it's a cyclical concept, right? You're listening, you're learning, and you're empathizing. And it never stops. You just keep going in that circle. And so, to Amy's point, you start before the abandoned cart ever even occurs. You layer in like zero party data collection. That is giving you a better idea of the need state of that particular consumer by having that information. Then, based off of that information and also knowing what their previous purchase patterns are like, you can make some product recommendations. So, for example, in this instance, this consumer, if you have a pet, you buy pet toys. And they bought pet toys before, but those were for a bigger dog. And now it's a smaller dog based off of what we're seeing in the park. So you can build out your machine learning capabilities in order to make those product recommendations for things that might be more relevant for a small dog as opposed to a big dog. But also by knowing that, her dog has passed, you can send out empathetic messaging about support and things of that nature in order to kind of help them through that difficult time. Then, in addition to,
Mike, how do you? Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just was going to ask, like, how do you scale this up, though? Leveraging a data platform, leveraging your activation channels, one-to-one, it's not very realistic in most cases, right? So we've been sort of talking about this in such a way that it's kind of a one-to-one scenario, but what are some techniques and tools in order to scale this up and make this automated and easy for a merchant and a marketer to leverage?
Absolutely. So that's where something like contextual personalization really comes into play. Contextual personalization is going to allow you to deliver multivariant content across, all the channels, and it is tailored specifically to the individuals, but you're also creating segments that those individuals will fall into. And so it's kind of like a matrix, if you will. And starting at the top of the matrix, you may have one or two variants. And then as you continue through the matrix, now you have three or four more additional variants. And then as you continue down, you have more and more. And so you are limiting the variants that are available, but you are still you're still providing personalized content to the individual that feels very one-to-one.
And I think this is where, generative AI holds a lot of promise, because content variation has been a limitation that a lot of marketers have faced in leveraging personalization tools for some time, and really just getting one, two, or three versions of your campaign or your website, homepage content, et cetera, is a challenge that is true for large organizations as well as small ones. And generative AI obviously lends itself really well, although the tools are very immature, and certainly we'll see a lot of evolution here. But it lends itself to creating content variations that can then be used in executing against these personalization tools that frankly have been maturing for a while, but lacked those variants. So it'll be interesting to see how personalization gets a bit of an unlock from generative AI's ability to help support creating content variants. Switching topics a little bit, I'm kind of curious with the time we have left. What kinds of questions or inquiries are you getting from your customer base about how to think about and leverage generative AI today?
I do think there's a concern that that like being what we call preserving empathy, right? So that the machine is going to take all of the personality out of it. Even though when you prompt a chat GPT or whatever, you can prompt it to have personality. But I do think there's that machines are taking over the world mindset a little bit with our clients of how do you slow it down just a little bit, make sure that how you're using it is ethical and not biased, and just tiptoe into it, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a legitimate concern, and with this generation of tools, especially, we see some indications of challenges, but already, you can see that, that's starting to improve. And of course, I would always advocate that humans use these tools to work and become more efficient and or create things like variants that they then would either put the finishing touches on or certainly approve before they're used and executed inside a campaign or a channel or on your site or what have you. That said, we are
And my
moving
hope is that
relatively quickly towards a level of automation.
we become more effective with these tools that allows us a little bit more time in the upfront to really plan thoughtfully, right? And to think about all those scenarios ahead of time. Because now we freed up our time because the content's being generated on its own, right? In my vision of the future, that would be wonderful. Of course, I'm a strategist, though, so of course I want to do the planning.
And from a technology perspective, at least from my standpoint, I don't see it as ever replacing anyone. To the point that you were making, Brian, it's freeing up their time in order to add more human aspects to what it is that we're trying to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a very powerful tool that has pros and cons, but I think the issues around concerns around job loss, I think are probably overstated, because the reality is most of these marketing organizations, e-commerce organizations are already, pretty thin in terms of the people and resources they have. They're already understaffed. And so this idea that, we're going to go cut a bunch of copywriters, well, those copywriters are going to be doing editing. They're going to be using these tools to do more variation and hopefully becoming more savvy also in how they use data to drive better creative content, which these generative AI tools will also help them with. So we'll see. But I think my personal opinion is that, there are going to be downsides, in society, right? In politics, in ways in which people will use it for nefarious reasons. That's true. At the same time, I think the concerns over job loss may be overstated. Well, I want to thank you both so much for your time today. I think we're about at time. Thanks for being a part of the AI Summit and for joining us here on the live stream as well.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.